Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 7 stories, from tales of Uber drivers, at-home stories, science experiments, and even a twisted tale involving Christmas. A huge thank you to all of tonight's authors. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like rating. It helps the channel more than most think. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. In an increasingly gig-based economy, you take on the jobs you can, even the ones that send alarm bells ringing in your head because you can tell that something just isn't quite right. I was having that very same thought as I looked up at my Uber passenger, who was waiting on a street corner. It was about 11 p.m., and I could only just make out his profile in the dying lights of a blinking street light. He was standing next to a bus stop flanked by a field of corn stalks. That wasn't an unusual sight in the Midwest, where the back roads seemed to be covered by pockets of farmland, but it just so happened to be the length of the corn stalks that helped me figure out that this dude was tall. I'm talking 6.5 feet at least. He was wearing dark clothing, almost like a dress suit, but he seemed gaunt and drawn in on himself. A wide-brimmed hat helped to secure his face, so I couldn't be certain about how old he was. In his left hand, he was clutching a black bag. I was tilting my head, wondering if I still wanted to take him on as my passenger when he looked up at me. I crept up to the curb and stopped there, the engine running idly. According to my phone, he was a first-time user without any reviews. Oh well, money is money, right? I'd already accepted the ride anyway, and it was only about a 15 to 20 minute drive. I parked my car and unlocked the doors. He seemed to take stock of my car, then seemingly satisfied, nodded and walked to the passenger side door. He was extraordinarily tall, so he had to carefully duck down to fit inside of the car. When he climbed into my back seat, the strong smell of menthol flooded the cabin. I wonder if he'd been smoking while he waited. I just smelled the strong odor of antiseptic, and not the bitter sting of smoke and tobacco. One of the big drawbacks of being an Uber driver was that your occupants tended to bring interesting odors with them into the vehicle. I'd often spray the back seat down with Febreze at the end of my shift, and even then, there would sometimes still be the smells lingering in the cabin for a few days. So, in the scheme of things, I guess I didn't mind the hospital smell. I'd take an overly clean smell over something like swamp ass, marijuana, or piss. "Hello," he said with a voice coated in gravel. He moved his bag and I heard the sound of metal on metal, like there must have been tools inside. "Evening," I offered, then shifted the car into drive. I tended to follow my passengers by example. If they were interested in chatting, then I'd make small talk, but otherwise, I'd mostly just listen to the radio and mind my business. Tonight's entertainment was provided by one of the local jazz stations. I was following along with a rhythm line when the passenger suddenly spoke up. "You normally drive late at night?" he asked. His voice was peculiar. It was deep, but he also spoke very deliberately, like he had found the exact words he was about to use before he said them. The word to describe it would come to me later. Calculated. "Yeah, I'm somewhat of a night owl," I said. This wasn't entirely true. I was behind on bills, and my day job as an office clerk just wasn't enough anymore, so I was whoring my car out to strangers a few nights a week. and I felt guilty about it every time. At least I kept up on vacuuming the floor mats. I saw your bag. You a doctor or something like that? I asked. I felt like I had reached a bit too far with the prying question, but I was really curious about what the hell the guy was doing out in the middle of nowhere with that bag. He tipped his head down and said, "Yeah, you could say that." Well, thanks for being candid. Has there ever been something you've wanted to do but haven't? He asked me all of a sudden. Hell, if that wasn't a question. There were hundreds of things I wanted to do. Hundreds of places I wanted to go. I was 35 and driving a goddamned Uber in the middle of the night. Sure, I said. Who doesn't? Not something small, he said, but something that haunts your dreams, makes you feel alive. The way he drew out his words as he said alive sent a chill through me. Well, there has been a movie I've wanted to see for a while now, but I just haven't had the time. He laughed, but it sounded almost more like a shuddering cough. It is good to not have regrets, he said. You must like games. If you don't mind amusing me, what if we play a game of heads or tails? That was a new one. Sure. I called back, not really thinking about it. What are we playing for? I heard a rattled cough and assumed it was him trying to laugh again, like his lungs wouldn't work quite right. Heads or tails? He croaked. I caught his eyes in my rearview mirror, and something about his gaze terrified me. He wasn't looking at me, but almost straight through me. His pupils were wide and deep, like black pits. He was smiling so hard I could see his teeth gleaming against his gums. Wasn't that a thing your eyes did when the light was low? I thought I had read it in a magazine once, and the pupils are black because light almost never escapes. Call it, he shouted so suddenly that I jerked the steering wheel. I could feel his breath on my neck. God, that menthol smell was so strong. He was leaning all the way up against my seat, the coin clutched between his fingers. Tails. I stammered without thinking. I glanced down at the routes on my phone, scanning for how much time was left on the ETA. A few minutes. The coin flipped through the air with a metallic ding sound. The stranger caught it out of the air and leaned in close as he slowly opened his hand, but then his face filled with disappointment. He leaned back in his seat and crossed his arms. Which was it? I asked, still feeling a bit shocked by his sudden outburst. Guess I had won, but what did I win? He remained silent, and the sudden silence creeped me out. I started to think about what he was doing at the bus stop so late. I reasoned that he must have taken a bus from wherever he had been working, and the bus didn't run by his place. But why would a doctor not have a car? Maybe it was in the shop, I thought. Maybe it broke down somewhere. The things we tell ourselves to calm our anxieties write stories of their own. A few minutes later, I reached the end of the route, which stopped at a 2-story house in a neighborhood I sometimes traveled through, about a city over from where we had started. I'll never forget what he said, or how he said it. It is good to be home. Climbed out of the car and slowly walked up the front steps towards the dark house. I waited a moment with the engine idle and pretended I was checking my phone. He seemed to fumble at the front door for a moment, but then the door opened, and he closed it shut behind him. Almost imperceptibly so. I expected the lights to slowly turn on around the house, but that didn't happen. It just stayed dark. My phone beeped with the promise of another rider, so I turned up the jazz on the radio again and left. I did a few more fares that night and forgot all about Mr. Tallman who reeked of menthol. In fact, he didn't cross my mind again until the next day when I was driving through the same neighborhood and spotted the house again. But this time, there was yellow police tape draped around the lawn. My heart sank. I slowed to a crawl in front of the house and leaned back. Hey, sorry. I just want to take a quick look here," to my passenger. "Oh my God," replied my passenger. "I think I heard about this on the news this morning." "Morning news?" I shifted uncomfortably in my seat and felt myself breaking into a cold sweat. "What did you hear?" I asked. "A neighbor saw the front door hanging open this morning and peeked inside. The whole family was butchered. Like, there was blood everywhere." "You serious?" I asked. "I just dropped the dad off here last night. That's... Jesus." "Oh my God, really? You should probably tell the police. They probably have a lot of questions." She reached over the seat with her phone and showed me an article she had pulled up from the local news. "Family of 5 slain in grisly murder." I looked at the headline, and then the accompanying image of the family. All of them smiling with no way of knowing their lives would soon be ending. The thoughts made me sick. Wait. I looked at the father. I mean, really looked at him. That was not the same man I had dropped off last night. I was almost sure of it. For one thing, he wasn't towering over the family like my passenger would have been. Even though I hadn't gotten a great look at his face, the face of the father in the picture looked far less harsh and defined. The tall man, my passenger, even though his face had been mostly hidden by his hat, what I did see almost resembled a crude wood carving. A wave of nausea washed over me as my mind tried to balance an equation that seemed impossible to rectify. I kept coming to the same conclusion over and over again. The father was not the same person who had been riding in my back seat last night. I knew that for certain. I handed the phone back to her and said nothing. I sank into my seat, screwed my face up to not give anything away, gripped the wheel until my knuckles burned white, and drove. I played back the memory in my head of the stranger entering through the front door. The slow, careful action I had assumed had been him fumbling with the key must have actually been him breaking or picking the lock, something I wouldn't have noticed as I flicked through my phone and casually glanced up at him. My pulse throttled against my shirt collar, and my stomach began to cramp. How could I have known that he didn't actually live at that address? I just did what I was told. I just did what the route said to do. This was not my fault, but maybe if I hadn't picked that guy up, no one else would have given him a ride. Maybe something else would have stood in his way and prevented him from ever reaching his destination. Maybe that family would still be. After I dropped off my passenger, I pulled off the road and went through my phone. I had to report him to the police, even if he might have falsified all of his information, even if he might be halfway across the state by now. It was then that I noticed I had a review I hadn't looked at yet. It was from the man, and he had left me a message. "Thanks for the ride. You're lucky it wasn't heads." My emotions are still raw, so please bear with me and try to overlook any typos. I think writing this out is the only way I'll manage to not only deal with my grief, but also to understand what happened. I moved in with my grandmother last year after she fell down several stairs and fractured her kneecap. She valued her independence and had no intention of going to a nursing home. She also viewed getting a home nurse as having one foot in the grave, so my becoming her live-in caretaker was our only option if she was to remain both happy and safe. Though a sweet woman whom I loved dearly, Grandma had never been the easiest person to live with. She was a picky eater, a neat freak, and she had to have everything to her exact specifications. She was one of those old ladies who would call the dog groomer to demand her money back because they trimmed her Maltese's bangs an eighth of an inch too short. In other words, she was a Karen. A geriatric Karen, but that's besides the point. About 2 months ago, she came down with pneumonia. It was a mild case, but her recovery from the fracture had been slow and had taken its toll on her, and her doctor was more comfortable having her in the hospital, at least until the fever subsided. Fortunately, she was back home in 2 days thanks to a trusty Z-Pack and IV fluids. The night she was released, I helped her into bed, made myself a cup of tea, and ordered some Chinese delivery from whatever place was open the latest, settling in for some Netflix while I waited for it to arrive. The loud ding of the doorbell made me jump out of my skin. I was a bit miffed, as I had left specific instructions for the driver to please not ring the bell. Then I realized, even in my hunger-muddled state, that it was only 9:02 p.m. My food wasn't supposed to arrive for another 45 minutes at least. I opened the Grubhub app and discovered that, indeed, the driver hadn't even left the restaurant yet. I was a bit spooked, but told myself that it wasn't necessarily a murderer at the door. It could just as easily be a neighbor, though I was sure as shit wasn't about to go and find out. It could have just been a wiring problem that caused the bell to go off on its own. Or maybe some little asshat was playing Ding Dong Ditch. Whatever it was, I wasn't budging. Eventually I became reabsorbed in my show, and before I knew it my phone was buzzing to let me know my food had arrived. I tiptoed over to the door, then cracked it open slowly. Just enough to snake an arm through the gap and pull the brown paper bag inside the house. I ensured the door was triple locked. Then I spent the rest of the night in a blissful haze of Americanized Chinese cuisine and The Office. It happened again a week later. Just 1 hour's difference. At 10:02 p.m., a loud ding caused me to nearly jump through the roof. I crossed my arms over my chest obstinately and tucked my bare feet underneath myself on the couch cushion. If somebody thought I was about to answer that door, they were dead wrong. Women don't answer unsolicited doorbell rings after dark. It's just another one of those rules of self-preservation that we somehow know innately, and that men literally have never even considered. Just like before, I distracted myself with Netflix, but unfortunately no Chinese food, and was able to shrug off the feeling that something was amiss. This went on for 2 more weeks. The morning after the third time, I noticed that Grandma looked tired. "Have you been sleeping okay, Grandma?" I asked her between segments of grapefruit. "Oh, it's the strangest thing. What was last night? Tuesday? Every Tuesday night for the past 3 weeks I've had the strangest dream. I'll hear the doorbell ring and I'll get out of bed and go to the window. On the stoop is a man in a dark purple suit. I can only see the top of his head from the second floor, but then he'll look up at me and I know him from somewhere, but I don't know where. But the thing is, I only recognize him in the dream. When I wake up and think about his face, he has no face, but in the dream he's like an old friend." "And then what happens?" I asked, the gears in my head turning as I chewed my food. "Then I wake up, but I can't get back to sleep, so I'll do some crossword puzzles until I drift off." It was obvious that Grandma was hearing the doorbell ring in her sleep and incorporating it into her dreams. I patted her hand and got up from the table. "I've had recurring dreams sometimes, Grandma. Remember that time I won 10,000 on a scratch ticket, and I had a dream about it every night for a week beforehand? I think this guy's your future boyfriend. Did you make a Tinder account and not tell me?" I don't think Grandma knew what Tinder was, but she chuckled lightheartedly anyway. Nevertheless, I was growing slightly concerned, so I got one of those Ring doorbell cameras installed the next day. We would then be able to verify if someone was ringing the bell, or if it was simply a wiring issue. I stayed up late the following Tuesday just in case. By that point, I was fairly certain that it wouldn't ring, as the electrician who installed our new doorbell had commented that the old wiring was indeed a bit frayed. However, I was still nervous with anticipation, and on the off chance that the new bell did ring, I wanted to ensure I was able to view the video footage live. At 12:02 a.m., there was a loud ding that, like the other times, nearly caused me to rocket through the ceiling like a deflating balloon. I immediately opened the app on my phone but saw an empty porch. What? If nobody rang the bell, then how did it go off? The wiring had been replaced. It was brand new. I kept the app open and continued to watch the live feed, just in case some prankster, or murderer, was hiding around the corner of the house. There was no movement, save for the gentle swaying of the trees lining the sidewalk as the night's gentle breeze brushed past them. Ding. Again. I jumped out of my skin. I had been staring directly at the live feed on my phone when that second ring sounded, and I can say with certainty that nobody was there. Ding, ding, ding. Motherfuck. I shouted, jumping to my feet and storming over to the door. Goddamn faulty wiring. It had to be. Ding, ding, ding. Emma? Is someone at the door? Somehow over the incessant ringing, I heard Grandma call down from the top of the stairs. It's okay, Grandma. The new bell is malfunctioning. Go back to sleep. Well, alright. I heard her feet shuffling on the beige carpeting of the upstairs hallway. Then the gentle snick of her bedroom door closing. Threw open the front door, and with a sudden finger strength I didn't know I possessed, I ripped the new bell from its place on the wall, threw it onto the brick stoop, and stomped it to death with my sneaker. We just won't have a doorbell from now on, I told myself, and that's perfectly fine. We'll get one of those stupid knockers instead. I left the ring carcass on the steps and turned on my heel, walking back inside calmly and shutting the door behind me. I noticed the change in temperature immediately, but figured it was because I had let in too much winter night air while I was destroying the doorbell. It wasn't until I had been absent-mindedly watching TV for about 15 minutes that I realized the chill hadn't dissipated at all. Oddly, the thermostat read 65 degrees, though it was obviously at least 20 degrees colder than that. It's amazing how quickly one can be struck with a sudden dreadful feeling. It comes at you like a train barreling down a track, and is arguably just as frightening. When I noticed that not only was the living room still cold, but so was the dining room, the kitchen, and even the downstairs bathroom with its closed door, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. My heart pounding, breath quickening, and stomach rolling with nausea. I made my way slowly up the stairs towards the truth that I somehow knew was waiting for me. My fears were confirmed when I pushed open the bedroom door. My grandma lay peacefully on her bed, her skin a sickly gray, her mouth open just a bit, her chest motionless. So I decided after 4 years of cooking for others that the life of a chef just wasn't for me. Couldn't stand all the non-stop customer whining and complaining. But this story isn't about my life as a chef. Last month I started at a private waste management facility, which is layman's terms as I ride on the back of a dump truck and get none of the benefits. Now it's an easy job. I work mostly throughout the night, and I'm done working by the time most of you folks would be waking up. Now this happened my very first night of the job. My sister's husband got me hired on the longest shift of the week. Every Tuesday we do most of the county, so we work from midnight to noon respectively. That night I was riding with the boss in the smaller truck we take in the back roads. After a few hours of shooting the shit and telling dirty jokes, we come up to this place called Burnt Ridge. Now I can't remember why it's called that, other than the grass don't grow as well as the surrounding areas. We get out of the truck and start walking up this long winding road. Some important folk lived out here and we didn't want to wake them backing up. Or, so the boss said. He told me to stay close and to not walk off, otherwise he's leaving me behind to walk home. And it being the tail end of winter, I stuck by his side pretty close. Until I heard a whisper from the tree line near us. Hey, it said. And I thought it was the boss, so I told him to knock it off. He looked at me and said, "Boy, what are you talking about?" I shook my head and kept walking. We eventually got to the house, and I'll be honest, it looked like a prop out of a horror movie, like Texas Chainsaw or something. I should mention that I'm in Pennsylvania. We don't have much in the way of scary things here. No ghouls or ghosts that I can think of. And what the hell are in these things, rocks? My boss said, slinging a bag over his shoulder. I picked up the 3 other bags. Not too heavy, but the walk to the truck might tell different. On our way down the hill, I heard another voice, this time a bit louder. "Hey, come here." This time my boss looked over and then picked up the pace. "Come on, boy." I, confused and a bit nervous, walked faster. The snow crunched beneath our feet as we hurried to our truck. But with each crunch, crunch, there was another set of crunch, crunch. My boss walked even faster and I picked up the speed. This time I heard the whisper from what felt like right behind me. "Turn around." My boss and I immediately took off in a dead sprint, dropping the garbage bags and jumping into the truck. The engine was off, but once the door slammed shut, we could make out a figure standing there in front of the truck. We turned the engine over, and when the high beams came on, nothing was there. Nothing but the garbage bags, a few dozen feet away from the truck. I looked at him and he was visibly shaken. "What the hell was that, Ron?" I asked him, and he looked shocked, not speaking. After a few minutes of looking around, I got out of the truck, jogged to the garbage bags, and brought them back, throwing them into the truck. Then we sped off. Shortly after that incident, the house canceled their garbage services with us. And honestly, I could care less we lost a customer. I'm happy to never go up Burnt Ridge ever again. The trees overhead were void of leaves, and the wind coming through the rolled-down windows felt nice blowing against my face. The brisk morning air brought back nostalgic memories of my childhood. Every morning, my father would wake me before the sun had risen, and we'd drive down this very same road, checking the barbed wire fences and the well-being of the cattle. The closer I got to my childhood home, the more I thought about my parents. I was dreading the conversation. A conversation that would most certainly turn into an argument, where I would have to tell Mom and Dad what I had been doing for work these days. It had been years since I'd seen them, and I would have to tell them sometime. I thought the best time to spill the beans would be after the big dinner. And family drama. Aunt Ruth was coming over, so I knew a few verbal collisions involving politics would be imminent. I made a right turn onto Beaumont Pass, the road leading to my parents' house. The road had always been a bit bumpy, so I was forced to slow down. This was okay because I wasn't in a hurry. Looking on either side of the road, I reminisced of the days I spent in this area as a child. My brother and I had trekked all over these woods, sometimes getting in trouble for not returning home until well after dark. I passed the old windmill where the goat pens used to be. The memory of my older brother, Johnny, running away from the mean goat we called Mad Baba came to mind. Dad had to shoot Mad Baba that day when he rammed into Johnny. The hospital visit cost Mom and Dad a pretty penny, and I remember we were unable to recover financially for a while. Damn goat hit my brother so hard it fractured his arm, bones sticking out and everything. Big bro screamed as I'd never heard before. He spent months in a cast, exempt from yard work, and to tell the truth, I was kinda pissed I had to do all of his chores. Good times. Yeah, good times indeed. A smile had crept onto my face. Perhaps this Thanksgiving, I would be able to make more good memories with my family. Johnny is married now, and he has a beautiful baby girl. I've seen their family pictures on Facebook, but I haven't had the chance to meet either his wife or my niece. Call me selfish. I simply call it busy working my ass off. Soon enough, I'd get the chance to hug and kiss all of them when they arrived around dinner time. Though I was anxious, and sweating bullets at the thought of telling my family about what I had been doing for money in LA, I have to tell you, it was nice to be back home after such a long time. Look, I'm poor, like dirt poor. If I were rich, I probably wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing, but bills have to get paid. No rest for the wicked, right? Mom and Dad had invited me to many other holiday gatherings prior, but I had to turn them down. I simply couldn't afford the drive from Cali to Texas. Instead, for the past few days, I had to spend my holidays with friends back in the city I've come to call the desolation of smog. It wasn't until I returned to South Texas to realize just how filthy the air in LA was. A shape appeared from behind the cover of some trees, obstructing my vision. The shape was revealed to be a familiar truck sitting on the shoulder of the dirt road. I knew that rusty piece of shit anywhere. It had been years since I'd seen him, but needless to say, I wasn't surprised to see my father was still driving the same truck he'd gotten in high school. At the back of the truck, he was tying a rope around a blue tarp. When I came to a full stop, he shut the bed of the truck, looked at me, and waved. I parked my car and got out. "Daddy," he smiled. "Hey there, sweetie." I walked to him with my arms out, but he raised a hand to stop me. His hands and arms were covered in dried blood, and his face spattered with tiny droplets. "I'd like to hug you," he said, "but I'm a mess. Just got done loading up a doe in the back of the truck. Bullet hit an artery. Let's just say, carrying the carcass back to the truck wasn't fun." "Deer for Thanksgiving? Couldn't get a turkey?" He laughed and wiped his hands on his shirt. "Can I take a look?" I said and reached into the back of the truck, but before I could touch the tarp, he grabbed my hand. "I wouldn't do that. It's nasty in there. Like I said, hit an artery." He released my hand, which left a bloody handprint. "I'm not skittish. All these years in the city haven't made me soft," I said. I remember the first time Daddy had taken me and Johnny hunting. He not only taught us how to shoot rifles, but also how to skin and process the animals we shot and killed. There is a Polaroid of that day somewhere, a picture of our smiling faces with blood smeared all over our cheeks. Right before Mom took that picture, Daddy had raised 2 fingers behind my head, giving me bunny ears. "I wouldn't want you to get blood on your dress," he said. There was something different about him I couldn't exactly put my finger on. I mean, yeah, he had gotten just a little older, but not much. Something in his eyes. He wasn't wearing his glasses. I put my hands up in an act of defeat. "Okay, whatever you say." He grinned and said, "It's good to have you back." "It's good to be back." We smiled at each other, me with my hands on my hips, him nodding and cracking his knuckles. "Go ahead and get to the house. I'll be back in 2 or 3 hours." "Sounds good, Daddy. I missed you." "Missed you too." He walked to the driver's side of the truck, opened the door, and got inside. He backed the truck out from the shoulder of the road and sped off in the direction from where I had come. The tires of the truck blew dust into the air. I coughed and waved my hand in front of my face. He must have been going at least 50 miles an hour. I was afraid he might crash. We'd talk about his reckless driving when he got back. What's one more family argument on Thanksgiving gonna hurt? The rest of the way to the house was just a short drive up and down a few hills. On the last hill, I was able to see the sun glinting off a metal roof, which must have been recently installed because the house had shingles the last time I was there. Other things hadn't changed a bit. The wooden fence was still standing and looked strong, with the exception of a few boards being old and withered. The carport housing the John Deere still had the dent on the side from the day Daddy taught me how to drive. No one else had shown up yet, which I was grateful for. I wanted to get my bags unpacked and settled in before the huggy kiss you, I missed you talk started. I parked my car, took the keys out of the ignition, and stepped out. When I shut the car door, a familiar howling greeted me. Old Buster came running from the backyard. His hefty barks were as loud as I remembered, although a little huskier. "Buster, it's me!" He growled, the fur on his back standing at attention. "Here, boy, it's just me. Don't you remember me?" His once bright white fur had turned a soggy gray. He'd gotten so much older. "Come here, boy." I patted my thighs. Buster sniffed the air, taking cautious steps toward me. I put my hand out to his nose. He growled again, still not completely trusting me. Eventually, he started to sniff my hand. "That's right, it's me, Barb. You remember Barb, don't you?" His tongue came out and started to pant. I rubbed his head and he licked my arm. When we finished getting reacquainted with each other, I walked to the front door of the house. I knocked and waited a few seconds. The face that welcomed me was most certainly not the one I was expecting. "Barbara!" My father leaned out of the doorframe and hugged me. My body went numb and felt as if I were going to faint. His face was the same. Same voice, same clothing, same salt and pepper colored mustache, same eyes, but he was wearing his wire-framed glasses. I felt as if I was going mad. No matter how hard I tried to make sense of the man who stood in front of me and the one driving off behind me, nothing logical came to mind. He broke off the hug and held me at arm's length. "Honey, are you all right? You look so pale." This had to be some kind of prank, right? Where is Mom?" I said. Daddy's eyebrow raised. "Said she was going out for a walk. You didn't see her on your drive down the road?" He then stuck his head out further, looking in the direction of the carport. He said under his breath, "Where's my pickup?" It hurts to write this, but I haven't seen my mother since. I have to talk about this. I have to get it out of me. It's only been a month, but so much has happened. I don't know if writing it all down will do any good. Dr. Land says it could help keep me anchored to reality. I don't know what that means anymore. Out of all the pilots in the Air Force, they had to select me. Whoever made that call sure screwed things up. I guess I should start at the beginning, which was apparently a month ago. Still hard to believe. After getting caught in a missile barrage on an airfield in Iraq, a bunch of us got shipped back to stateside for reassignment. After 2 whole days of leave, I was ordered to one of our bases in New Mexico. The orders were vague, but I booked my flight and arrived in the sunny scrubland on a beautiful morning. I drove down to the base in my rental and was immediately brought to the CO's office. A man in a black suit was with her. He worked for the CIA. They told me I worked for the CIA now too. I was being recruited into a highly classified R&D project. They told me I was selected on the basis of my experience flying classified missions and medical records. They told me the project was related to the development of a new control system for aircraft, something that would allow the pilot to execute more maneuvers more quickly to gain a decisive advantage over the enemy. As someone who's seen his fair share of sticky rudders and flaps, it sounded good to me. They warned me it could pose risks to my life and my health. Like a true Top Gun, I arrogantly assumed it couldn't be any worse than flying in combat, or being bombed and shot at on the ground. I was wrong. Because the project was so secret, the new control system wasn't being tested at the New Mexico base. The man from the CIA put me in a car and had me put a blindfold on. We drove for a while, maybe a half hour before he had me get out of the car and get on a plane. I still had the blindfold on, but the plane sounded like a Cessna. We flew for maybe an hour or two before landing. The man from the agency gave me permission to take my blindfold off. Turns out it was a Cessna, and he was a pilot too. We were on a runway surrounded by more dry, hot desert. There were only 4 or 5 hangars off the airstrip, and a large outcropping of rock behind them. It looked like the only landmarks for miles in any direction. On the taxiway, I saw no other planes taking off, landing, or even sitting there. I remember finding that odd. I asked him if this was Area 51 and he laughed. I am authorized to tell you this is not Area 51. With that, he taxied us into a large and empty hangar. Our footsteps echoed across the concrete expanse, reverberating off the prefab metal walls. It looked like a standard Air Force hangar, albeit a bit larger than usual. The man from the agency walked me to the back of the cavernous hangar and into the installation. The facility was built into the rock itself, directly accessed through the hangar. It reminded me of photos of the Cheyenne Mountain Complex I'd seen. Even had a few buddies stationed there. They offered me tours, but I never took them up on it. I guess this was much smaller than Cheyenne, and the agency man agreed. He said the base was only meant to house 50 to 100 personnel at any given time. The technology was also much more up to date than the Cold War relics they had. The whole place looked brand spanking new. It was not at all what I was used to. The agency man showed me to the mess and then to my apartment in the barracks. I'd be getting my full briefing on the mission in the morning. With nothing else to do until then, I made myself comfortable. As the traveling must have made me more tired than I realized, I jolted awake at 4:15 in the morning. Stupidly, or perhaps because of sleep deprivation, I decided I needed some air. The stars were spectacular. They looked like they would if you were flying at 50,000 feet above the clouds. But here I was on the desert floor. You could see the arms of the Milky Way, and everything was so bright the whole landscape was lit up for miles around. The hangar lights weren't even on. Almost at that exact moment, my awe turned to sweat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I had the distinct feeling I was being watched. I slowly turned around and saw nothing. A shooting star arced across the galactic night as I found myself trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Carefully, I started walking back towards the hangar doors, and that's when I saw it, standing almost perfectly still. The dark outline of a cougar. Seeing me and seeing that I saw it, the big cat slowly started walking towards me, growling deeply. Its eyes looked different from what I expected. They were transfixing. I was frozen, but telling myself to be ready to run, even as I knew this thing would easily catch me on its 4 legs. I jumped as 4 gunshots cracked through the air and exploded through the cougar. A woman I hadn't met lowered her pistol and angrily stormed towards me. She told me I wasn't allowed to be out here. We didn't want any Chinese spy satellites passing overhead, learning anything specific about who works here. "And you made me kill a cougar," she added. She introduced herself as MP. Not military police, but she wouldn't say if those were her initials either. With all this mystery, I should have expected code names. After this brief introduction, she made me help drag the cougar's body inside. We didn't want the Chinese knowing we were killing cougars either. I'd like to think we bonded over this, but I was kidding myself. I was kidding myself then, and I still am now. I don't know if it's normal to think about her as much as I do now. Sometimes I wish I could get her out of my mind. Other times I don't want to. Maybe it's a good thing that I can't decide. Anyway, the facility had an incinerator, which we took the body to. We said our goodnights and I returned to bed. The next morning I found out initials are code names here. I was to be addressed as TD. The agency man just said to call him CIA. And the doctor at the briefing said doctor or doc would be fine. I was confused why a doctor was there, but they swiftly cleared things up. R&D had been working on a neural computer interface and would link a pilot's brain directly to an aircraft. It was the size of a microchip and would be implanted directly into the part of my brain that controls executive functioning. Rather than having a control panel full of switches to monitor, the implant would tell me how each part of the plane was functioning. Instead of a throttle and a stick to steer, I would think the direction I wanted to go and how much power I wanted to use. It all sounded so surreal, but they told me the theories behind it were sound. When they told me I was to be the first human test subject, it did not inspire confidence. I should have walked out right then and there. Everything would have been so much better if I had, but they told me to see the plane that I'd be flying first. I thought the Air Force had given up on making sexy airplanes. Boy, was I wrong. This thing looked like a silver bullet, a cross between the U-2 and the Hughes H-1. It almost looked molded out of one continuous piece of shiny stainless steel. They offered to let me take her up for a spin. They hadn't yet dispensed with the normal control system inside. All the switches were still there to test how she flew under normal piloting. I couldn't say no. They had me completely. The surgery to install the implant was the next morning. I didn't feel any different physically. They took another day of recovery to make sure I was okay and that the implant was functioning properly. Then we began with simple tests. These were easy at first, involving things like getting me to move a cursor on a computer screen with the implant. It was a bit strange mentally focusing on moving a cursor, but when it finally moved, it was exciting. We were in business. The next week of tests gradually increased the complexity of the computer systems and the tasks I was to perform. It wasn't as hard as I expected. No headaches, no major physical stress. The effort wasn't any more taxing than a long day working in front of a computer, even though I was doing much more. Instead of having to use my body to operate a computer, I could manipulate it with the speed of my thoughts. It even became fun. Problems began when I got into the cockpit. I wasn't even going to fly. I was just going to perform the pre-flight checks and start the engines. As I was mentally examining the status of each flight system, a deep ringing shot through my head. It felt like the worst migraine I've ever had. We stopped the test immediately and took me to the doc to get checked out. They couldn't find anything wrong with the implant or my brain. I got the rest of the day off as well as the following day while they ran more tests. Finding nothing wrong, we decided to try getting back in the cockpit again. Despite my apprehension, everything ran smoothly this time. I was able to inventory all flight systems and even telepathically turn the engines on. Feeling them turn on in my brain as well as my body was pretty damn cool. In fact, because things were going so well, we decided to taxi the plane on the runway. We did one full loop around and back to the hangar before calling it a day. It was better than sex. Then I wanted to sleep. I dreamed that I was on a bombing run over a city at night. I didn't know where it was. May have been no specific place at all. It was probably a composite of all the bombing runs I've flown in my career. But right away this dream felt different. It felt more artificial than dreams I had before. I was also flying much lower than I normally would in real life. The plane was painted white and red. I didn't realize why until I saw the Wendy's girl painted on my back tail fin. I laughed in the dream, flying a night mission for Wendy's. Then I dropped my payload over the city. Hamburgers rained down from my plane and I circled around the city to get a look at the people enjoying their unexpected storm. They began picking up the burgers from the ground and eating them. They kept eating them. There were thousands of burgers and people were gorging themselves. They were eating too much. They were eating so much they started to bloat. I watched their stomachs explode, spilling intestines and viscera on the ground. This dream wasn't so funny anymore. I woke up. I tried to put it out of my mind as just a weird dream. It stayed with me though, and it was on my mind as I sat in the cockpit ready to take off for the first flight test. CIA cleared me for takeoff and I taxied into position. I throttled up and began speeding down the runway when suddenly the engines cut out. I had no idea what happened, but I had to abort the takeoff. The plane ended up overshooting the runway and rolling about 50 feet into the desert. I quickly jumped out as the rescue truck sped towards me. It didn't look like any damages were done, but I was rattled. "What happened?" CIA asked me. I didn't know. After making sure I was okay, he raced me back inside. The doc checked me out and didn't find anything wrong with me or the implant. I went back to my room to rest, and they told me we'd debrief tomorrow. The next dream wasn't much better than the first. I was a part of some SEAL team getting ready to storm a house. We were outside the door getting ready to bust it down. I felt the anticipation of my teammate, whose night vision goggles I was looking straight into. Then I looked down to the patch on his shoulder. It wasn't an American flag. It was a patch of the Dick's Sporting Goods logo. Looking down his arms, I realized he wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding a tennis racket like a rifle. So was I. The door exploded and we stormed inside. A woman screamed and some bookshelf fell over. My teammate sprinted up the stairs. I took my tennis racket and began beating the woman until her face looked like shredded cheese. More screams came from up the stairs. Basketballs and soccer balls and kickballs started bouncing down the stairs. One bounced up towards my face and I woke up. I didn't get in the cockpit again. At the debriefing in the morning, they told me the flight computer logs showed that I had cut the engines. Or rather, the implant did. Since I didn't consciously cut the engines, but the implant thought I did, they knew they had a problem. I told them about the dreams, but they dismissed them. They said this was a software issue and got to work on recoding the implant. They gave me a software update. It didn't help. I dreamed ads and death every night for the next week. I began to dread sleep and actively avoided it. After that, they took the dreams and my behavior more seriously. The rest of the tests were canceled, and they arranged to put me in a secure hospital closer to civilization. There, more doctors read in on the project, and the contractors who created the implant would better be able to find out what was going wrong inside my head. Doctor told me there wasn't much more he could do out here in the desert. I thanked him for his effort. American 180, leveling out at flight level 350. I said it in my headset. I was back to being a pilot in this dream. I picked up the PA to make the captain's announcements. I was sure to thank all my passengers for flying the friendly skies with American Airlines. Then I took my clipboard out of the side pocket and began beating my co-pilot to death with it. He fought hard as his blood rained on the instrumental panel. Then I took out my supplementary oxygen mask. I found the switch for the cabin pressure and flicked it off. Everyone was gasping for air in their seats. I thanked each row for flying American all the way to the back of the plane, where a flight attendant stumbled out of the bathroom. I started choking her out and she hit me back. It felt real, and I realized it was real. I was choking out the doctor in the facility's hospital room. I had woken up without realizing it, and I wasn't in control of my own body. As we fought, I started to fight myself mentally, whether to get myself to stop or to say something. I was slurring my words to get any sound out. Finally, I managed to mumble, "This is not me. I am not in control." I'll never forget the look on his face. It was kind of confused recognition. This is not me. I am not in control. His eyes bulged and rolled back into his head. This is not me. I am not in control. He stopped kicking and his legs went limp. MP came storming into the room, pistol drawn. I wanted to cry, but I batted her arm down as she fired once. She shoved me back into a hospital bed and I fell down on the floor. A syringe needle was right next to me on the floor. I picked it up as she ran for the door. I wrenched her back and began stabbing her as she screamed. This is not me. I am not in control. CIA came running with more base security as I kept stabbing her in the jugular. The needle is small, but hitting the artery does a lot. This is not me. I am not in control. CIA looked startled. He slammed the door shut and locked it from the outside. MP gasped on her own blood. This is not me. I am not in control. I kept repeating it over and over and over again. My body tried to fight its way out of the locked door, but it was unsuccessful. My mouth kept trying to say something else, anything to explain things. Instead, it was just... Eventually, I passed out and woke up gagged and strapped to a gurney. Now I'm here. Dr. Land sees me every day. Even though he's not a psychologist, he tells me they can't take out the implant because it's now integrated into my brain. They haven't been able to figure out where the dreams are coming from or why I became violent. The theories range from my brainwaves somehow connecting to the internet, to Chinese hacking, to an adverse biological reaction. One of the contractors even suggested it could have been a software glitch. Maybe someone on their end uploaded the wrong algorithm, and now I have sponsored dreams. I was told I'd be the first to know what anyone found out. I'm not optimistic anyone will find anything. Dr. Hawks, my real psychologist, who I see every other day, thinks it might be repressed PTSD, interacting with the implant in an unpredictable way. Though, once she asked me something that's stuck with me. What if the test worked? That's how I knew we weren't being recorded. I knew what she meant, but there was nothing anyone could prove. Maybe I wasn't read in on the true purpose of the implant. Maybe I wasn't need to know. But maybe it was Chinese hacking or a software glitch, or my body rejecting the implant the same way it would reject a mismatched organ. I can't get back on that mental merry-go-round. If they figure it out, they'll figure it out. If they won't, they won't. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. Maybe I'll find some way to get this published. Maybe after I'm dead. I want someone to know what happened. People deserve to know what happened. If someone does ultimately read this, know that I existed. Know that MP and Doc existed. And know that a brain-computer interface should never, ever be developed ever again. There's a strange quirk about my family's home that I didn't understand until recently. Let me set the scene for you. I've lived in many places throughout my life thus far. Even though at age 7, the idea of moving was completely alien. I couldn't imagine life in a new space, away from the house with the crop of English ivy, doves that nested outside the master bedroom window, and dapper white paint. Just a short drive from the beach. At age 13, however, all of these things I had seen as an impossible reality came violently true. As often divorce does, my family split homes and my childhood home was sold. Now I had new spaces to exist. My father ended up settling down in a smaller home in a tight-knit small community, and my mother bounced around apartments in the city, and I bounced the fuck out of those houses. Fuck her. I was now living with my dad. I'd spent weekends and a month every summer in this house, but at first it was odd seeing how the space was used in my father, remarried, day-to-day life. I learned rituals and repetitions that I never really got to see in my short stays during visitation time. As I said, the house is located in a small community, a suburb. I don't know if it's close enough to consider it that. With just one entrance road over a double set of train tracks. It's about as close to a gated community as a non-gated community could be, punctuated with an overabundance of the affluent. It's a beach town. The closer to the beach you get, the more money can be found. The house is a somewhat modest residence at the cusp of the town. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1-story. A few cats and a dog. There isn't anything too outwardly strange with the house, aside from perhaps the full wall mirror at the end of the only hallway in the house, which takes months to get used to, and the 2 single bedrooms that are barely used as they belong to children who are barely there. But at night, the oldest part of it becomes crystal clear, or whatever the equivalent of that phrase would be for a situation where you can barely see. In a town away from any large group of public buildings, the lack of light makes the dark all-consuming, and the lights in the house barely keep up. What might be one of the strangest details is that there's a quick fix to this issue of the lights in the house not being bright enough. All the lights in the house have a dimmer switch, with the slider always slid to the very bottom for the lowest brightness of light. With just one overhead for the whole hallway, and the same situation in the kitchen. It's eerie how all of the furnishings and walls shine in the cheap yellow glow of the warm house bulbs. It's like you're looking at an old sheet of paper. Everything in your vision looks to be yellowed and beginning to rot. It's an unspoken rule that the lights should never be brightened. I know because I've tried to slide them up before, and within 15 minutes of being adjusted they will be back all the way down, or even off. And my otherwise amicable parents give me a weighted and stern stare. Fuck that. What could be so wrong about using a light for its intended purpose? The purpose designated to it hundreds of years ago when Edison, or whoever he stole his work from, first created the light bulb. I usually wake up and leave my house earlier and sit in the kitchen for a midnight snack way after hours when my parents are asleep. And the animals too, with the dog curled up at the end of the hallway, right in front of my door. Whenever I track down that hallway, careful to not step on the dog, I turn the light on, full blast. I'm not going to leave it up to chance my ability to see him or my ability to navigate the hall. Once I reach the kitchen, I do the same with that light too. That takes you all up to today. Today started off no different. It's a weekend and I've been dwelling in my room for the most part of the day, leaving only for snacks in the bathroom. It's late at night and time for my midnight snack. I have a bit of an odd eating schedule, usually being too tired to leave my room until lunchtime, so I've begun to think of my late night snacks as an alternate breakfast. In my semi-ritual, I crack open my door, toe over my sleeping dog, turn on the lights, and track to the kitchen. My cat, Lucy, is waiting for me. She usually doesn't beg as much for the meat that my father and stepmom eat for dinner like my other animals. She has a more refined palate, and her vice is all the dairy I consume late at night. She's partial to cereal milk, ice cream, and goat cheese. Admittedly, it's been a bit since I last was eating goat cheese out here in the kitchen, having been busy the past few weeks. Lucy was prepared. She sat on the table and looked at me expectantly. I always feed her at the end of my meal, letting her lick clean a piece of cutlery or dish. I begin to eat for myself, spreading layers of goat cheese on some crackers, and absent-mindedly munching and scrolling through my feed. I notice that Lucy is drawing close to my hand, trying to get a sniff of my food. I think it's silly when she does this. She'll rub up right on me and stick her face as far into my stuff to try and get a taste. I begin to record her behavior with my phone, and when I do, she suddenly stops. She lifts her head up from sniffing the cheese and looks behind me. Then her eyes track over me and off to the darkness in the distance of the room. It's important here to understand the layout of my kitchen. It's a very long, rectangular room, with the living room on the other side. As I mentioned before, the kitchen light is only one overhead. It lights the kitchen, but the other side of the room is still drenched in darkness. And whatever my cat is looking at over there, she has the focus in her vision that she has when looking at a bird or flying bug. My cat is still kind of young, and she's very lively and loves to play and hunt bugs. And she has the same intent look of seeing one right now while staring into the distant dark. Here's what I learned about dim lighting. When you have a light on very bright, it may make one area very bright, but it makes any visible darkness out of range even darker by comparison. As humans, our natural ability to see in the dark is by all measures not that bad. Given the proper conditions to come out, what this means is that if we aren't surrounded by artificial light as it gets darker, we will find that our night vision is fairly usable. To be in an area of brightness, our eyes adjust to that. My eyes were adjusting. They had been adjusted to this brighter light, and an uneasy feeling came over me as I realized the darkness in the next room seemed darker to me than it did when there were no lights. I'm not one to force myself into these kinds of mind games. I ignore my gut and just continue my snack, which is admittedly very good. I finish up my cheese. I offer the now empty container to Lucy. She eyes it and takes a few careful tastes before deciding her insatiable dairy craving is satisfied and jumping off the table, stalking off into the surrounding darkness. With her gone, I began to realize I was alone, utterly alone, and the hard-to-penetrate darkness started to seem larger and more menacing than it had a few minutes ago. I got up and began to get more snacks. Back turned to everything else. My headphones were in. I was doing everything I could to ignore the uneasy voice in my chest. I should have never turned. I should have never left my surroundings more unseen than they already were. As I turned back around, it almost felt that everything was getting a little dimmer. I saw that my circle of light reached only almost all the way to the end of the counter that separated the two rooms from each other, my stomach dropping. As I looked at the edge of the light, I noticed something. It was getting smaller. It is hard to explain. It was as if slowly, the radius of the circle slowly closing in as whole vertical chunks of the room became black, one bite at a time. Fuck that. Never mind any further snacking. I turned around and left the room. I walked back down the hall, and as quickly as I could shut myself back in my room, the turning feeling in my stomach instantly calming down a great degree. But in my rush back in here, this might be where I've gone the most wrong in this whole story. I hadn't dimmed the lights as I left, or even better, turned them off. I'm really wishing I had now, because I know whatever is out there has got to my dog. All I heard him get in edgewise initially was a low growl, before it was desperate teeth and claws. He's silent now. I know whatever is out there is right out there, waiting for me. If even that, please, let this be a lesson to whoever finds this. Our greatest fear is often the things we can't see, and for a good reason. You don't want to see them. The snow was falling outside my window, forming a thick white blanket of Christmas over the entire street. Strings of white, green, and red lights adorned houses, yards, and trees up and down my block. Some were blinking, some were still. Giant inflatable Santa Clauses and snowmen stood guard in the front yards of many. My Christmas tree twinkled in the corner while the lights around the ceiling and doorways provided a magical, dark Christmas atmosphere. Just the way I like it. In front of me, a glass full of eggnog with cinnamon. Just the way I like it. On my screen, Ebenezer Scrooge thoughtfully explained to his nephew how much of a humbug Christmas truly is. And you know, he's kind of right. At least today, for the most part, people are more worried about buying things than they are about the meaning and joy of Christmas. It's especially present in the commercials that try to play into your emotions about the holiday, only to end by telling you to buy their product, as if giving them your money will make you feel loved or special. I sat on my couch on this Christmas Eve, eating gingerbread cookies and washing them down with eggnog while waiting for my pizza to arrive. My melancholy dinner in my usual melancholy living room. Oh, don't worry. I'll be having Christmas dinner at my family's house tomorrow. Christmas Eve is for ordering out. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. The snow was getting pretty bad out there. I hope that the pizza guy didn't get stuck on his way, and I'd like to think that my thought was out of love for fellow humans, but it was really because I wanted that pizza. I stood in front of my picture window, watching the occasional car drive through, sometimes slipping on the freshly fallen sugar crystals lining the street, hoping that each one would be the pizza guy. I refilled my eggnog in the kitchen and headed back to the couch to continue watching. I awoke from my cinnamon-induced coma due to a loud booming sound. I sat up straight and wide-eyed on my couch, looking around, looking through my window. I then heard a loud sliding sound, followed by an avalanche of snow coming down just outside my window. The sound of chains followed. I arose, walking toward the window. A cloud of snow dust impaired my visibility, but soon I could see that something was sticking out of the snow. Wisps of gold and red. What could have hit and slid down my roof, impaling itself through this fine, white, crystalline dust. I squinted, but there was no visible movement, so I decided to step outside and have a look. The air was crisp, and the wind wasn't helping. Snow blew into my eyes as I stepped cautiously through the door, donning my winter coat and boots. It was truly desolate out here now. No more cars heading home to be with their families for Christmas Eve. Everyone had undoubtedly settled down for a long winter's nap. Inspecting the aftermath in my yard, I couldn't see much more than I did from the other side of the window, but when I looked up toward my roof, a larger tale began to unravel. Strewn across my roof were several animals that appeared to be dead. They looked like... This must be some joke. My senses. They cheat me. Thought to myself. Through the assault of snow on my eyes, they looked like reindeer. And there was more. A magnificent red carriage appeared to have crash-landed on my roof. It lay in pieces, save for the main cabin, still mostly intact. I glanced back at the burial mound of snow in my yard. My lip was trembling, already knowing what it was. I had to uncover it anyway to know for sure. Using only my hands, I began carefully wiping away bits of snow to exhume whatever spirits lie here in wait. Brushing away a bit at a time, more swatches of red, as well as white material continued to appear. It was obvious that some of the red that I saw from inside was the snow itself, drenched in the precious juice of life. When I reached what looked like white beard, I sped up my work to uncover this man's face, in case he was still alive. My work was stopped short when I heard something behind me. I turned to look back, toward the roof. It was then that a dreadful, agonizing howl came from the direction of the roof carriage. I kept silent, staring, as if waiting for an update. Then I stood, frozen in time, blizzard continuing its assault upon my face, when a second guttural howl emanated from the same direction. This time it was louder, stronger. It was then that my eyes allowed confirmation. What appeared to be a large claw, covered in dark fur, slowly reached up and over the side of the carriage. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was attached to. I abandoned my mission and trudged back inside as quickly as my boots would take me through the snow desert that was my yard. I slammed and locked the door, causing more snow to fall from the roof and onto the mound that I had been trying to uncover. Please pray for me. I will update you later if I am able. As I slammed the door shut and locked it, I collapsed to the floor, my back against the door. I was trying to catch my breath. The television blared away. You don't believe in me? Observed the ghost. I don't, said Scrooge. Did I really see what I thought? I hoped that this could be some hallucination, brought on by a sip of curdled eggnog or undigested gingerbread. I shot over to the table in front of my couch in search of my phone. 45% battery life left. I just had to remember to plug it in soon. I unlocked it and dialed for help, turning on speakerphone. I listened as my dialing was met by brutal silence in return. Glancing down, where it usually said 4G, my phone now showed 0 bars of connectivity. Damn it. Had I forgotten to pay my bill? Did they conveniently just happen to shut it off when I needed it most? My next best guess was that the snowstorm was interfering with my connection. Luckily, my Wi-Fi was still working, so I was able to access the internet. My ears were interrupted by a loud thud on the roof. I stopped in place to listen. There was a second, similar thud. This was followed by 2 more slow thuds, then a single louder one, shaking my entire house. This culminated in a familiar sliding noise and avalanche outside of my picture window. I waited and observed for more developments. I was startled by a knocking on my door. Was this thing knocking on my door, as if it was just here for a friendly visit? I cautiously lowered myself toward the ground and moved slowly toward the door. When I reached it, I stood up carefully to look through the peephole. The knock repeated. I looked through the peephole to see a guy. He was waving at me through the hole. I cautiously unlocked and opened the door, just enough to look through the crack and see who it was. It was the pizza guy, holding my pizza. I opened the door wider. The snow assaulting both of us now, he said. Here's your pizza, sir. Hey, my car got stuck down the road, and I had to walk the rest of the way through this blizzard. Can I use your phone? I opened the door fully and said, Get inside, quick. Thank you, he said. What a night to be out working. Now my car is stuck in this mess and I don't know how I'm going to get it out. How's your Christmas Eve so far? I don't think you're going anywhere anytime soon, I said. Well, if I can just use your phone, Phones aren't working here right now. I'm assuming you already know that. I interrupted. I thought it was just my carrier. Are you telling me yours isn't working either? He asked. Complete whiteout, I said. Here's your pizza, he said. I took it from him and set it on the table. Did you see anything out there? I asked him. Like what? He replied. Like in my front yard? Just a lot of snow, but I could barely see out there. It's a blizzard. Barely any visibility. Well, we might be in bigger trouble than you already thought. What do you mean? He questioned. There might be something out there, I told him. He gave me an inquisitive look. Something? He asked. Something hit my roof earlier. Hard. I went out to inspect and saw something up there. Like some sort of animal. An animal jumped onto the roof of your house? He asked with a funny look. A little more than that, but sure. I didn't stick around after I saw it move. I'm not sure what it was. Where is it now? He asked. Well, just before you showed up, I think it tried to get up and walk. Then it slid off my roof and into the snow. It's probably buried out there now. Are you telling me a reindeer landed on your roof? He said, obviously trying to conceal his laughter. I don't know what it is, and I don't know how it got there. I shot back, trying to convey that I'm not crazy. Imagine if I told him there were not only several presumed dead reindeer, but also a probable dead Santa Claus in my yard, along with a large winter creature out there somewhere. He looked at his phone, probably hoping that he would have a connection by now so we could call someone sane to pick him up. He looked up again, disappointed. Well, if I'm stuck here, I'm going to take a look, he said. I don't think that's a great idea. It could be something dangerous. I opened the pizza box to see that the cheese had slid all the way to one side. I grabbed a slice of bread and pizza sauce, mumbling some expletives. How dangerous could it be? If it was something light enough to be able to get on the roof? He asked, as if he had just solved some sort of riddle. I heard it walking on the roof until it fell over. It shook the entire house. It was not light. I'll be quick. I have to see, said the pizza guy. I followed to the door. As he let himself out, I stood guard in the doorway, ready to close it on him if some giant Christmas monster were to reveal itself. Perhaps if the thing ate him, it would be satisfied and leave me alone. When he got out to the middle of the yard, I turned to look up at the roof. Holy, he blurted. What the? Shh, I yelled at him. Don't wake it up. Wake what up? Those things are all dead. Not those, I said in a hushed, harsh tone. In the yard, I said, pointing toward the mounds in the snow. He turned and looked at the first mound, and then the new one that had just been formed by whatever tried to walk off of my roof. Dark patches protruded from it. He took slow, crunchy steps toward the mound. Don't go near it, you idiot, I said in my best ASMR scream. But he continued. He reached out to touch one of the dark spots. I think it's fur, he said, turning to look at me. As he looked in my direction, I heard it again. A low, guttural moan came from the mound, followed by an angry growl. He came running back to the door, but I wasn't quick enough to lock him out and let the beast eat him. He slammed the door behind him and yelled, What is that thing? I have a feeling that this is about to get a lot worse. Whatever is out there is still alive. The lights are starting to flicker. I'm afraid the electricity might go out because of this storm, so I need to get this down first, in case it goes out. I hope I'll be able to update this later. Man of the worldly mind, replied the ghost. Do you believe in me or not? I do, said Scrooge. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me? The lights continued to flicker until they went out completely. The strangest thing, though, the TV stayed on. Just the lights went out. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. Great. What's next? I said. What was that thing out there? Repeated the pizza guy. I don't know, I replied. You touched it. Why don't you tell me what it is? Just then a clattering occurred from above, like a bunch of small rocks pelting the roof, one after the other, or a pack of kittens parachuting down onto the house. I thought you said those things were dead, said the pizza guy. They looked dead when I was out there. You were just outside. Why didn't you tell me that they weren't dead? I thought they were. I fumbled to the kitchen in the darkness to grab my Meg flashlight from the drawer. Then began the giggles. High-pitched giggles from outside. Remember those large avalanches off of my roof from earlier? Now came small avalanches, many of them, one at a time. A pattering of tiny legs running, jumping, and crunching into the snow. Over and over again. Along with it came sounds of tiny bells jingling. Not just in the front yard this time. This was happening in the opposite direction toward the backyard as well. I shot glances back and forth between the front picture window and the kitchen window in the back, repeatedly seeing tiny things shooting from the air into the snowdrifts outside. Oh, fuck. I let out. The noise halted abruptly. Pizza Guy and I stood deathly still, waiting. One by one, small shadows started to appear through the fogged-up windows. Through the picture window appeared one small, round silhouette, just above the windowsill. Then, one through the back window. Then, two in the front. Then three. They kept coming. By the time they stopped multiplying, there were at least a couple dozen of them just hovering above the sills of both windows, as if they were watching us. What the fuck? Started Pizza Guy. The silence was broken by another giggle, followed by a sliding sound and a gigantic puff of soot and smoke blowing out of the fireplace. A projectile shooting straight out through the glass doors in front of it. Then a louder giggle as the thing got up and took off running into the darkness. Then again and again. They kept coming through the chimney, one by one, with us shrouded in near darkness, the only light being from the moon and the neighbors' Christmas lights shining through the windows. All the while, the ones outside the windows just standing, and now all giggling together as this happened. I aimed my flashlight at the last one of them, to see a tiny, humanesque body, dressed in some sort of green outfit with a green hat, tiny jingle bells hanging from it. He ran in the same direction as the others, disappearing into the darkness of the house. Elves, I screamed. Elves? Yelled Pizza Guy. Pizza Guy turned on the flashlight on his phone and went running into the back, where the elves ran. I followed him with my mag light. I opened one bedroom door and saw elves opening the window, letting more of them in. I slammed the door shut and went to the next to see the same thing happening. Pizza Guy looked in one of the other rooms, shouting, "More elves," before slamming the door closed. "What are we gonna do?" He screamed at me. "I don't know, Pizza Guy. What do you think we should do? There are a bunch of goddamn jingle bell wearing elves running around my goddamn house." "My name is James, not Pizza Guy." "That's nice, Pizza Guy. I'm a little busy right now." A giggle came from the end of the hallway, back toward the living room and kitchen. Shining my mag light toward where the sound came from, I landed my light beam right on its face. It was an elf, but there was something wrong with it. Something with its face. It looked rotten. "What's wrong with his face?" said James, the Pizza Guy. "I think you were right. They were dead," I replied, "and they're still dead." "Zombie elves? Are you kidding me?" James shouted. The hallway elf started running down the hallway toward me, giggling the entire way. "Oh, what a cute little elf," I attempted to say right before he jumped in the air and tackled me by the torso. I now lay on my back on my soft carpet, with a pint-sized giggling zombie just 12 inches from my face, baring its teeth. James grabbed him from the back, picked him up, and threw him into one of the rooms, quickly slamming the door behind him. "Let's go," he said. I got up and followed him, running toward the front door. James threw open the door and we stopped dead in our tracks. Less than 10 feet in front of us, in the yard, was a tall, furry animal on 2 legs. It let out a blood-curdling growl. It must have been at least 8 feet tall. I cut in front of James, grabbed the door, and slammed it shut. "What was that?" he screamed. "Back door?" I suggested. We ran to the back, looking carefully through the window before making any attempt to go through the door. Who knows what could be out there? After seeing nothing, we decided to take the chance. I opened the door slowly, trying to minimize the amount of noise I would make. We both stepped outside carefully, and I closed the door lightly behind me. It was still snowing on a near blinding level. After just a few steps, a giggling came from the direction of the front of the house, as a small green thing came running toward us. I started to run, but the giggling stopped almost as soon as it began, cut off by a high-pitched, shrill squeak. I stopped in my tracks, turning to see what was happening. Just as I looked, maybe 5 feet behind me was the towering creature, holding up an elf by his head, one hand on either side. And then, pop. The creature's powerful hand squished the little jingle baller's head with almost no effort, as blood, brains, and gore squirted everywhere, including a splatter across the creature's face. Pizza Guy and I stood frozen watching. The creature stared back at us. This was a staring contest I couldn't afford to lose. The creature spoke. "I'm Krampus. You need to come with me." "You're Krampus? Are you going to hurt us?" I asked. "Yeah, are you going to do something to us? 'Cause if so, I don't really," added James. Krampus stared at us. I could feel myself melting inside. I was sure his eyes were shooting invisible rays that were burning my organs and turning them to mush. "Think of me as the ghost of Christmas future. If you don't come with me, you will definitely have no future." "Okay," I said. "Yeah, sounds cool," added James. "I fear you more than any specter I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, I am prepared to bear you company," blared from the TV inside. We followed as Krampus turned to walk back toward the house. As we walked, there were freshly slaughtered elf bodies laying everywhere. Some with crushed heads, some with switches through their brains, some with no head at all. When we reached the back door, I took notice that the fuse box was wide open next to the door. The lock had been broken off, probably by these tiny undead bastards. "Hey, just a second," I whispered. "I think we might be able to fix the power." "I can take care of that," said James. "Okay," I added. While James fiddled with the box, Krampus started to enter the house through the back door. I followed. Giggling was followed by a high-pitched hiss. They knew he was here. My flashlight pierced the darkness. I slowly moved it from corner to corner, only to see that the elves had the back rooms, and now covering the living area like cockroaches. They were on the furniture, on top of counters and tables, everywhere. I landed my light beam on one of them with a particularly snarly look on his rotting face, standing on my kitchen counter. After a few seconds of stillness, he launched at me with a high-pitched battle scream that nearly deafened me. Giggles came from all directions as my flashlight fell to the floor. Krampus reached one hand over, wrapped it around the elf's head, and squeezed until its little head popped like a grapefruit. Now they were charging from all sides. I couldn't see from where in the darkness they came, just that they were descending upon me. There was a buzzing sound for a couple of seconds, and suddenly, light from the heavens shone down upon our battlefield. What I mean is, the lights in the house turned on. James yelled, "I got it!" followed by the sound of a metal door closing. Now our half-pint demon-spawn anti-friends were all in clear view. Krampus started taking them one by one, running his switch through their heads like a machete. I stared in awe for a few seconds, but realized that I had to defend myself from these things as well. I looked quickly around the room, spotting my knife block. I withdrew the butcher's knife from the top and swung around to meet the faces of my giggly assassins. As one jumped onto me, Opening his disgusting mouth full of rotten teeth, I rammed the knife through the side of his head and watched the evil light in his eyes turn off. I retracted my knife from his head, stared for a few seconds in awe of what I had done, viscera gushing down on me, and then pushed his lifeless elf body to the side. James screamed, "Keep going, don't stop," as more of them advanced on us. I dispatched another by ramming the knife through the top of his head and watched him fall over. I couldn't get the knife out of his head, so I had to find another weapon. I opened a drawer and pulled out a metal mallet meant for tenderizing meat. And that's exactly what I was about to do with it. I looked over and saw Krampus use his fist to punch right through an elf's face, coming out the other side. Next to him, James stomped one of their heads, leaving a mess on my floor. Krampus dropped his burlap sack over the top of one and swung the sack against the brick fireplace, leaving the sack lifeless. "Friday the 13th, Part 7. Nice," I shouted at Krampus. We threw up our hands and high-fived. I started swinging the mallet at their heads as they ran toward me, just to slow them down. After several were down, I continued beating them until their heads were mush. Glancing over at my counter, I had an idea. I picked up one of these Happy Meal-sized demons up by their legs, turned him upside down and lowered his head into my blender, reaching over to hit the puree button, Santa's little milkshake. Next to me, James was cramming one of them into the microwave, punching at him to make him fit. When he finally got the door closed, he hit the 1-minute button. It didn't take the entire minute before the inside of the microwave exploded into a red splatter. "Gremlins," James said. "Nice," I replied. I reached over to my stove and pulled all 4 burners up to high. On one of them sat a dirty frying pan that I had used to cook bacon that morning. One of the elves had opened my refrigerator and was now swilling my eggnog. Furious, I grabbed the glass bottle out of his hand and started bashing him over the head with it. "Don't touch my eggnog." The final blow sent him to the floor. The grease in the frying pan started crackling. I picked it up and slammed it face first into one of the little toy-making ghouls, watching his face melt and disintegrate before my eyes. I shouted over to Krampus and James, "I'll take 4," pointing to the burners on the stove. James and Krampus each picked up 2 of them, 1 in each hand, and carried them over to the stove, sending them each face first into one of the burners, holding them down while we listened to the combination of screaming from their mouths with the sound of their flesh frying out. The last few of them ran outside. We heard them getting back onto the roof. "It's about to get a lot worse," said Krampus. "What? Why?" asked James. "The reindeer, they're still on the roof. Those elves are probably going up there to bite them." "So? They're dead, aren't they? Why do we care?" said James. Krampus stared at James. "The elves are zombies," I said. Fuck. If you are reading this, please send help. If we make it, I will post another update. I apologize that it's taken so long to report back with the rest of what happened, but I've been in jail since Christmas. When I last left off, Krampus had just informed us that the tiny terrors had returned to the roof, and were likely up there to turn the reindeer into zombies. And I let out a curse that would have earned me a punch in the mouth from Mom. Krampus walked toward the picture window, facing the front yard, staring into the snowfall. "What do you see?" I asked. "I'm checking on Santa," replied Krampus. "Isn't he dead?" I said. "No. He sure looked dead when I was out there earlier," I said. "He's not." "How do you know?" "Because if he was, he wouldn't be lying there in a snowdrift." "What do you mean? Where would he be?" The TV blared. "Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, Answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be? Or are they the shadows of things that may be? Only. Do you have any guns? Asked Krampus. I have one in the basement. It's an old shotgun that my grandfather gave me as a birthday gift when I was a kid. I haven't used it in years. You have ammo? I think so. Lead the way. I headed toward the basement door with a sense of urgency. Krampus and James the pizza guy followed close behind. I threw open the door, flipped the light switch, and descended the stairs. Rounding the corner, I headed over to grab a key that was hanging on the wall above the workbench, and took it to the metal cabinet on the opposing wall. Unlocking the cabinet, my grandpa's old double barrel revealed itself. I pulled it out, handed it to Krampus, and grabbed the ammo case on the shelf below it. Krampus opened the action, revealing 2 empty barrels. I handed him 2 shells to load. Just then, I heard breaking glass upstairs. We stopped and stood silently to listen. Then we heard it. The giggles. Those evil little leprechaun larpers were back. Krampus turned toward us with the universal index finger over lip signal for shh, and waved his arm toward him as if to say, "Follow me." I threw the strap from the ammo case over my shoulder, and we began to walk up the stairs with caution. Krampus in the lead position. When he was just halfway up, 3 of the ghoulish goblins appeared in the doorway with another round of undeservedly arrogant giggles. They descended toward us. Krampus charged toward them and shoved both barrels into the mouth of the closest one, pushing it back into the other 2. While doing this, he used his free arm to grab the door handle behind them and pull it shut, trapping them in between him and the door with no way out. He pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. "I thought you said this thing worked, boy." Krampus growled at me. "I haven't used it in years. I don't know." "Hammer," he yelled back at me. "What?" I asked. "Get a hammer, now," he said. I ran back toward the workbench, found a hammer, and ran back to hand it to him. I could hear the elves squirming and giggling the entire time, like some sort of mad jesters, completely unaware of their oncoming fate. Krampus released the action on the shotgun and dropped the shoulder stock to reveal the 2 shells in the barrels. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the hammer from me and slammed it right into one of the shells, sending an explosion right through the head of the lead elf, and straight through the other 2 behind him, finishing off with a hole in the door at their backs. He pulled the barrel out of the elf's mouth, and all 3 dropped in place into a short stack of bloody elf cakes. "Phantasm," yelled James. "Silver balls," I shouted with wide eyes. Krampus turned his head slowly and looked at me with one raised eyebrow. "What the hell is wrong with you, boy?" He spoke to me. I just fucking with you. I love the tall man." I relaxed with a sigh of relief. Krampus advanced to the top of the stairs, and we followed. Squishiness sounded from the bottoms of our shoes as we continued out of the stairway, over the sticky elven mess. We stood in the living room, observing the sound and shadow. The blizzard was so bad now that we couldn't see outside of the windows. It was nothing but a wall of white blazing past the glass. It was then that the new sound began, a deep, growling sound, soon after followed by heavy, clomping steps across the rooftop. And soon, the jumping from the roof, with the sound of landing in the snowdrifts. "What are we going to do?" James whispered. "I don't know if we'll be able to take these reindeer if they've all been turned into zombies," replied Krampus. "They're a lot tougher than most Keebler zomblets." "Then what do we do?" I asked. "The only thing that can save us and this town now is Santa Claus." "Santa Claus? He's unconscious, or maybe even dead in a snowdrift. How is he going to save us?" I replied. He's not dead. That's the problem. What? I questioned. Because you're apparently too stupid to have figured this out at your age, I guess it's now my job to fill you in. I'll send you my tutoring bill. You see, Santa is not a mortal being. He's a supernatural entity. How do you think he's been around for so long? How do you think that it is that nobody can find where he lives? And how exactly do you think he's able to control time dilation in order to deliver gifts to billions of people in one night? Do you think a human could do that? After a pause, he continued. The Santa buried in the snow out there isn't Santa. Well, it sort of is. He's inside of that body right now, but that's just a body. If the physical manifestation of his body dies, he's instantaneously released from the body and will remanifest. So why isn't he doing that? I asked. Because he's not dead. The elves made sure to keep him alive while making sure he stays unconscious so he can't fix this. Well, what are we gonna do then? Asked James. Santa has Christmas magic, and we need that in order to fix this. Well then, let's wake up Santa to use his Christmas magic, replied James. We'd have to go out there, dig him out, and drag him inside first, if we're going to try to wake him up. But those reindeer are already out there, and I'm guessing the elves did what they did to set out to do. You heard those growls. That doesn't mean the reindeer are happy. We might not make it past them, let alone back again with jolly old Saint Krispy Kreme on our backs. If we're going to do this, we have to find the quickest way from point A to point B. Yeah, and what's that? Asked James. Boys, said Krampus, we're going to have to kill Santa Claus. James passed out, collapsing to the floor. Pizza guy, I screamed. I ran over to James and started fanning him, trying to wake him up. Heads up, said Krampus. I lifted my head toward the front window to see that within the wall of snow, large, dark shadows were beginning to form. Oh boy, I said. I began shaking James, telling him to wake up. No response. The growling began again from outside. Krampus loaded a second shell, getting ready with the hammer. I yelled, "Wake up!" and slapped James across the face as hard as I could. It sounded like a whip crack. Ow, James said as he awoke. Get up, it's party time. I shouted at him. I hurried to the coat closet, reached through my coats, and grabbed my long, unused baseball bat from the back corner. I shouted to James to grab a fireplace poker. The three of us stood at the ready while the growls grew louder. Our meditation was broken by the sound of breaking glass. Through the front window protruded the head of a mangled reindeer face, dripping blood, presumably from the broken glass. This reindeer was obviously dead. There was no life in his eyes, only the cold, blank stare of an automaton looking to complete his mission. I couldn't blame the reindeer for this. It wasn't their choice. With the reindeer came the blinding snow of the blizzard outside, which was now invading my living room. The wind howled through the new hole in the window, blowing against us. He kept moving slowly through the window, ignoring what the glass was doing to his body as he pushed through it. When his front legs were inside, pulling to try to bring himself the rest of the way in, Krampus slammed the hammer into one of his shells and watched the shot explode from the end of the barrel, traveling directly through the reindeer's head, which dispersed in every direction, now covering the front wall of the house. The reindeer body collapsed in place. However, there were already two more reindeer trying to get inside through the window, following the first one's lead. I swung my bat at one of their heads, making direct contact, but all that did was make him angrier. As he let out a deep bellow and aimed his dead eyes directly at me, I screamed in horror. I saw that these were going to be much harder to kill than those little Keebler cookie makers. Krampus redirected the 12-gauge toward the one that I just hit, and once again slammed the hammer into his remaining shell, launching it at the reindeer. This time, it wasn't as helpful. It blew off one side of the reindeer's head. It was now a half skull, nothing but gore hanging from the left side of his face. He kept moving forward. James started using the fireplace poker to beat and try to stab the other reindeer's head. It was certainly making him angry, but I wasn't sure how long this would stave them off. The half-faced reindeer was now fully inside. He lunged his mouth toward Krampus's neck. I now heard glass breaking at the back of the house. More of them were coming in. Krampus was now on the ground with this reindeer on top of him, teeth lodged in his neck. Krampus was punching the reindeer in the face, which wasn't helping. Krampus yelled at me, "You've got to kill him. You've got to kill Santa," he said as he handed off the 12 gauge to me. "But how? I can't. I don't know what. Do it," he said as he pushed the shotgun toward me, the reindeer still chewing on him. And then it happened. The next creature to bust its way inside did not come through the window. It came through the door. The door flew open, revealing a dark shadow through the blizzard blowing by. As it walked in through the door, it became less shadow and more apparent. The swatches of red and white, the blood splatters. It was Santa. "Santa!" James yelled in excitement. It was then that I realized Santa was not himself. Those elves had decided to recruit him to help finish their job. Santa was not alive, and not dead. He was now undead. How were we supposed to fight a supernatural entity that is now zombified and in control of Santa's magic? "Do it! You have to!" yelled Krampus. I snapped out of my trance and grabbed the shotgun from Krampus, and I grabbed 2 shells out of the ammo case. I backed up toward the center of the room to load them while zombie Santa moved slowly in my direction. There were reindeer crashing through windows and entering through the back rooms now, and zombie Santa was at my front door. Nowhere to go, nowhere to run. I aimed the barrel towards Santa, grabbed the hammer, and slammed it directly into one of the shells. I missed completely. The shot hit the wall. "Aim, you idiot!" yelled Krampus. I adjusted my aim and slammed the second shell, exploding right into Santa's face and torso. But it didn't stop him. He let out a sinister ho 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 as he continued advancing slowly toward me. The reindeer finally finished his job on Krampus. I heard his final breath come out as his eyes darkened. I immediately wondered how long before Krampus would reanimate and come after us himself. I couldn't let that happen. As I stared at Krampus, James ran from the side with his fireplace poker, ramming it through Santa's head. Now the handle dangled from one side while the poker stuck out of the other. Santa seemed to stop advancing then, wobbling slightly. "Steve Martin, wild and crazy guy," I said to James. Santa fell forward, face first, flat on the floor. James reached over to high-five me. I didn't reciprocate. "Holy," I said. Santa was still twitching, but then stopped completely. A split second later, there was a deafening sonic boom from outside. James and I turned our attention to the front window. The reindeer stopped advancing. They now lay still, and then walked through the door. Santa. I looked down at the dead Santa on the floor, back up at the non-dead Santa, then back once more. "What did you people do?" he asked us. No rotting flesh, no bloodstains, just a jolly sleigh pilot in a fluffy red and white flight suit. "Santa!" James and I both shouted at him. "I guess I have to fix everything around here," he said. "Close your eyes and cover your ears," he instructed us. "This is for your own protection." Pizza Guy and I looked at each other, covered our ears, then closed our eyes. The sound of the blizzard coming through my broken window stopped. A few seconds later, Santa pulled my hands off of my ears, then did the same to James, and told us we could open our eyes. The zombie Santa's body was gone. The reindeer zombies were gone. The elf carcasses were gone. My windows were no longer broken. Krampus stood next to us looking like nothing happened to him. "Good job," Krampus said to me, placing his hand on my shoulder. "You too," he said to James. "Now," said Santa, "which one of you killed me?" But Krampus said, "Nah, just fucking with you. I knew he told you to." Santa winked. "Now we have a job to finish. Enjoy your Christmas, boys," said Santa. Santa and Krampus walked out the front door. The blizzard had calmed down and we could see now. I heard the sound of bells jingling. On the front lawn, there was a brand new, untarnished red sleigh with 8 reindeer. Not one of them was a zombie. Krampus and Santa hopped in, waved, and flew off like they had just brushed off some minor inconvenience. It was then that I heard the squad cars. The red and blue lights came around the corner, headed our way. They stopped right in front of my house, jumping out with guns drawn. "Hands in the air," one of the officers yelled. "It's okay, officers. We're safe now," I yelled. "Hands in the air. Don't make me say it again." "Okay," I said as I raised my hands slowly in the air. James did the same. But as James' hands were fully extended, he looked over at me, winked, and faded slowly into thin air. "What the?" I said out loud. "Where did he go?" the officer yelled. "I don't know." One of them cuffed me, sat me on the porch, and told me to stay quiet while the others searched the house and yard. They didn't find James or anything else. "Can you tell me why you're here?" I asked them after they completed their search. "Several of your neighbors called in to say that they were hearing gunshots and swore that you were killing people over here. Who's your buddy that disappeared after we told you to raise and put your hands up?" "That was the pizza guy. I've never seen him before. He brought my pizza tonight." "Anything else you want to tell us?" I wasn't about to tell them that we just killed a bunch of zombie elves, zombie reindeer, and zombie Santa Claus, only to have Santa Claus come back and fix everything with Christmas magic. "No, sir. I'd just like to go inside to eat my pizza." "Well, that ain't gonna happen. We're gonna need to take you in for questioning." "What? I need to go to my family's house for Christmas in the morning," I pleaded. They didn't respond. After this, they quietly shoved me into the back of one of the squad cars. We drove silently off into the night. I was in jail for nearly 4 months. They presented the judge with all the 911 calls they received from my neighbors about gunshots, murder, and the pizza guy who disappeared when they showed up. I'm pretty sure the only reason I got out was that eventually they realized they had nothing to hold me on, or just got tired of dealing with me. Also, an attorney showed up, saying he was my family lawyer. He walked into a room with the judge and prosecutor for about 30 seconds, came back out, and I was free to go. As the attorney was walking out with me, he said, "Steve Martin, really?" He winked at me and walked away. Hey everybody, so as it turns out, I did not quite reach the 2-hour mark that I usually aim for. I hope you guys enjoyed the stories. I figured I would just ramble for a couple minutes rather than pulling up another story and recording for another 10 to 15 minutes. I thought it'd be fun to just ramble for a couple, because I used to do this all the time. If you go back to my old stuff, or if you were even just around for back in those days, I would ramble about just whatever's new in the world of Slumber all the time, which right now is a lot. I got a lot of really cool things going on in my life right now, a lot of things that I'm really excited for, but I'm not even gonna bother trying to catch you guys up on everything. There's just way too much. But some cool things pertaining to the channel. I finally bought a new computer. I'm sure there's gonna be some people asking what the specs are. I'm going to keep it honest. I am not good with technology. I kind of just like had some of my more techie friends tell me what's good and what I should be going for. So it has a RTX 3070 and 32 gigabytes of RAM. Apparently those are good. I don't know. Apparently those are things that you want though, so that's what it's got. I'm not gonna say how much I spent on this computer, but it was quite a bit. It was quite a bit. But I figure it's worth it because it'll help me be able to bring content to you guys more consistently, more efficiently. Plus with like new consoles rolling out, like the new Xbox and PlayStation, I figured that I'd just go for PC gaming this time around. Not trying to start a console war. Let's please not do that. But I figured, you know, if I can get a good computer to game with and use it for work, it makes sense. So I finally was able to do that. And I know it's just a computer, but to me, it means a lot that I was able to do something like that. Yeah, I don't know what else to really catch you guys up on. I'm probably going to be getting my own place here within the next few months, which will be really, really cool. But then again, maybe not. It's not so much that I'm not capable of doing it. It's like, where do I want to live? Like, where do I want to spend my life at, you know? And that's really daunting and scary, but also really awesome and exciting at the same time. So, I think sometimes people forget that aside from making videos, all of us content creators, you know, not just even mentioning myself, just everybody on this platform, we're all real people, creators, viewers, no matter what it is. We've all got our own personal lives and things that we're focused on, things that we're passionate about. And I've just been spending my time focusing on things that mean something to me. And I'm doing really well right now. And I'm not going to get too sappy. It's just things are going really good. And I hope things are going well for you guys as well. And girls. And anything in between. So I think I'm going to wrap this up. Otherwise, we're just going to... I could ramble forever. If you guys have ever been to my streams, I am very good at rambling. Yeah, so videos should be coming out every 5 days. Been working really hard on trying to... get ahead on content and making sure that the videos are the absolute best they can be. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. And I will talk to you all later. Good night, everyone.